Hello, everyone. I'm Asha Swami, and this is James Noh-Kuhn. For a moment, I couldn't remember your last name. And we're here having conversations, and it's called Conversations Millennials Speak. And as I was saying to James, the astute observer may notice that James, by any definition, may not fit into the category of millennials. So I have to say that millennials is actually shorthand for something that I mean rather differently than that, which is what I personally call the third generation of Ananda. And that's not a chronological definition. That's the master, of course, started everything. Swami was the first generation of disciples. My group, which I would call founding members of Ananda, which happens to be a certain chronological age since the founding happened 50 years ago, we're the second generation who learned from Swami. Then there's a third generation, and that third generation is mostly millennials. I've been told that sometimes spirituality skips generations. And so it's like there's a certain number of people of what I call tweeners who are actually not part of the founding tribe and are not part of the millennial tribe, but nonetheless are key leaders at Ananda. But generationally, and it's not their fault, but generationally, it didn't seem to have the same mass spiritual karma that the other two tribes we manifested for sure, and the other tribe seems to be manifesting. However, James and his wife Viveca Devi, whom we'll talk to tomorrow, are part of the next generation of leadership at Ananda Palo Alto. And so I'll be talking to each of them twice this week, and I just wanted you to meet them. So, with that long introduction, James, we want to talk today because I actually don't really know your story, and I know that others don't. So I'd like to hear how you came to be a disciple of Master. What were you doing? Why did you change what you were doing? What inspired you? What's the answer
In many regards, as I was saying, this is sort of part two. Part one is Viveca Davies' story.
here? Uh-huh.
I was the husband at home who
Uh-huh.
was supporting my wife, who was a disciple, a Kriya bond, very much in the flow of the spiritual life. I wasn't. I wanted nothing to do with it. I spent almost my entire adult life being not Catholic.
Uh-huh.
That was my spiritual, is what I was not. It wasn't defined as what I wanted to be, as what I wanted to not be.
Uh-huh.
But there was a 5-year period there where she had gone through the yoga teacher training, the meditation teacher training. She came home and would teach me these things. And I had some experiences and they were lovely and they were great, not enough to get me onto the path. But again, it was more about supporting her. And 5 years of all that, and we were hosting a meditation group. We were living in the East Coast at the time. Um, Prem Shanti and Om Prakash would come down from Rhode Island. They would stay with us. We'd have kirtans, Sunday service. In fact, Viveka Devi and Prem Shanti would joke, like, he's not on the path, but he's doing all this. No, he doesn't want to be. 5 years, Viveka Devi, we're going to go to the expanding light. We're changing our whole life.
Okay,
Literally,
we're
I
going
had
to
left.
pause. I'm going to pause for just a second but I want to go back just to one phrase. What does it mean to be not Catholic? Because I want to feel what that is before we
Yeah.
go forward. So we're at the point now where, okay, you're about to think about going to the expanding light, but what does it feel to be not Catholic? What does that mean? Obviously, that meant you were at some point, I
Yeah, I
presume.
was raised Catholic, went through all the things that kids do
What
here
are the
in
things?
Palo
No,
Alto.
you're assuming. I don't know. What do all the things that Catholic kids do?
Well, baptized, first communion, go to mass every Sunday, is in Catholic school for the
Uh-huh.
first few years. All those things, catechisms, all those
What does
things.
it? What does it? Who does it make you to do all those things?
Well, I think that was the problem. It didn't
Uh-huh.
feel like it made me anything. It was going through motions. It was dogma. It was, here's what I have to do, here's what I can't do. And that just didn't have any juice for me.
So it was about what you can do, and God will approve, and what you can't do because He'll disapprove.
If I do what he approves, then I can go to heaven. And if I don't, I go to hell.
It's really that simple. That's how the whole thing came down to you.
Yeah, pretty
Oh
much.
my,
Black marks on my soul and everything.
one of my friends told me when he was 6, the nun told him that if he was a good boy, he'd get a bigger house in heaven. He said that was wonderful news for him because he didn't care how big his house was in heaven, so therefore he didn't have to be good.
It was you were talking about Lakshmi a while back, and she was talking about becoming confirmed. I
Uh-huh.
had a similar but slightly different experience because in that process for me, I realized the confirmation baptism is the community accepting the baby.
Right.
Confirmation is the child accepting the community.
Right.
In those classes, I realized I don't want to be a part of this community. I don't
Wow.
know who these people are, and so I decided not to go forward. So I
Right.
was never confirmed.
How old were you when that took
I
place?
was probably 15.
Mm.
Most of the others were younger. I was the oldest one in that particular class.
Right.
I asked permission of my parents, but they said fine. I never asked them how they felt about that.
I see.
But that was the beginning for me of this. I don't want to be this.
And this was tell me again then what it
Going
looked like
on
to you that what
is
because sometimes when people talk even about being atheists or something, they're rejecting a specific concept. So what specific concept were you rejecting?
I had to be told as part of the Catholic faith, it felt like I had to be told what I believed in,
Uh-huh.
how to believe, how to practice. The Sunday Mass I found pretty boring, even though the priest that I went to, the family priest, he would really expand on things, but it didn't have I didn't feel any devotion at all. I'm
Right.
sure it was there for them, but this is what I went through. It didn't
Right.
feel devotional for me.
Right.
That I think in hindsight, that was the key, the
Right.
lack of devotion.
So you waited till you were 15 to rebel though. Were you just not paying attention or it just wasn't important enough?
No, you weren't allowed. I wasn't allowed to.
Ah, got it.
That was a major rebellion. And as most 15-year-olds are often rebelling about all kinds of things.
Right. So you just took it there. So now there's a long space in between. So all this time in between, you're just pursuing ordinary success. You're having a career. What were you
Oh,
doing?
yeah. Yeah, exactly. I had been working for coming out of college, went to work for a large corporation. Was very happy in that job and worked for almost 20 years there.
What kind of work? What kind of work do
Um,
you do?
I worked for Nabisco
Uh huh.
and I was in the corporate office for a lot of those years, but I was the supply chain, logistics, distribution, managing inventory,
Uh huh.
managing warehousing and transportation, all those kinds of things.
So solving problems. You're a
So
problem solver.
exactly, it's exactly what
Yeah,
it was, solving
and
problems.
that's fun. If you're a problem solver, you can it can be crackers or
Yes.
it can be railroads or anything. Yeah.
It just wasn't solving problems in the direction of God,
Well, it was in the direction of Detroit or Chicago or wherever
yeah,
the crackers had to go.
or the direction of the profit and loss statements.
Oh yeah, that's right. Okay, so you had 20 years of a corporate career. When did your wife come into your life in all of this?
We got married when we were 30,
Uh-huh.
and so I had been working there for not quite, but almost 10 years.
Uh-huh.
And the we both grew up here in the Bay Area, but the corporate headquarters were in New Jersey.
Uh-huh.
So in fact, when we met, that's a different story, but it was a blind date. But then immediately I moved to New Jersey. So it was really a long distance relationship
Uh-huh.
for a year and a half until we got married.
So let me just pull the thought together. So you were a rising young executive.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So the rising young executive meets his princess, woos her and wins her. Is that what
Yeah,
happened?
exactly. And we felt it was, love at first sight. We were building on that. And at some point, right before we turned 40, so we were married almost 10 years, to make a really long story, it's a good story, but it's a really long story. She came up with the question for me of, do I feel like we have realized our potential?
Uh-huh.
The answer was no. I
Uh-huh.
mean, we were both tremendously successful at everything that we were doing. I
Uh-huh.
was, by any measure, successful in the career. She had this thriving yoga practice. She was a great teacher, still is.
Uh-huh.
God was number one in her life, all these things. But there was something that was fundamentally missing. It was a very good life, but it wasn't the great life that we felt was our potential.
Now, God was number one in her life. You were busy being a not Catholic, but she still took you on as a husband. Did she
Yeah,
see, she saw something in you that you didn't see,
yeah,
or
yeah.
she was just rolling the dice and hoping for the best?
Well, she saw my spirituality. For me,
I see.
spirituality and religion were one and one.
I see.
I could not separate them. It took me a lot of years to separate those. So
Uh-huh.
I didn't see myself as spiritual.
I see.
He did, and that was the kicker. Plus, the thing I knew before we were married, I was number two. and God was number one.
Right.
But the reason I was okay with that is because that's what made her her.
Very good. So she was correct. It was you were arguing against semantics and dogma.
Yeah,
You weren't really arguing against truth. Is that
exactly.
true? Yeah.
Exactly. I believed in God. I was not an atheist.
Uh,
I had no idea how to practice or how to honor that.
right. Okay. So now we're in New Jersey. Are we still working for Nabisco?
New Jersey, working for Nabisco, we're in that 5 year period where really it's the process of me getting out of my own way.
Okay. So, but during those 5 years, that must have been the time when Ananda created an East Coast
Yes,
site.
that's right.
And so those 5 years started because Ananda came into your neighborhood, correct? Not that you went to Ananda.
Well, that's actually part of Viveca Davies' story, but no, that was coincidental.
That was coincidence.
She actually would be coming out to the expanding lights several times every year.
But
Um,
when it entered your living room, it was because Ananda came to your neighborhood.
exactly.
Right. So you wouldn't go to it, so it came to you.
Exactly. I did have 2 trips to the expanding light early on. The first one was in '97, but that again, it was and I had a fantastic experience. Met Biraj of all people. He was
Uh-huh.
very instrumental in that regard. But it just didn't stick for me. But that was because of me, not because of the teachings.
Okay. But nonetheless, God was pulling the line.
God was pulling the line. We went through this 5 years, and then we realized, okay, good life, not great. We need drastic changes.
Did that create an existential crisis? Or was it just let's make a new business plan?
Oh no, it was a crisis in almost every sense of the word. That ultimately I let go of a career and a job. I let go of everything that was my identity in order for us as a couple to figure out what is it that we're here to do.
So what gave you the courage to do that?
I can look back now and say God and Guru, as well
Mhm.
as the love for my wife, but at the time it was love for my wife. I knew we had come together. I felt it in the deepest part of me that there was some purpose we were not realizing yet. We needed, and we weren't on a path to realize it. We needed to get off of that path.
Did you feel that she was and you weren't? Or did you feel like it was a shared destiny that
No,
hadn't been?
it was shared. We were on the corporate path, even though she was in all of this spirit. She was on the Ananda path. I mean, she was a
uh,
Kriya bond, all these things. But we were in a corporate lifestyle, and it was the lifestyle that was not conducive to whatever it was that we needed to be.
Did it
It's what
create
it was not trying to happen.
did that create tension between you, or did it draw you closer, that realization?
Ultimately, it drew us closer, but there was a question there of
Mhm.
for her, because if I didn't say yes to leaping off this cliff without a net, she needed to do something different,
I see.
even if that meant alone.
Right.
But I think she wished, she wanted, and I know I did. We needed to stay together. There was
Right.
something there that was greater than each of us as individuals.
Right. That's
The
very
sum was
good.
greater than the part.
So that's now Ananda's been visiting your living room for the last 5 years. You look to everyone like you're part of the Ananda family, so everybody but you thinks that you actually are part of it. But
Yeah,
you're self-defining. Everybody's humoring you is basically what's going on at this point, right?
pretty much.
And then it comes to Viveka Devi realizing that, and you realizing together that something has to change. We're not where we should be. It's a call from God that we're
It's a
not where
call
we
from
should.
God, and there were some circumstances, and this is part of the longer story, that we could not have possibly orchestrated. Miraculous circumstances that allowed me to leave Nabisco
Uh-huh.
with a severance package,
Uh-huh.
so that I could not work for almost a full year and
Right.
still be on the same salary that I had been on, all the same health benefits, everything for
Right.
almost a full year,
Right.
which
So
allowed
how
us to put energy into getting out of that life
right.
to figure out what is the new life. We put so much energy into that life, we couldn't just suddenly switch train tracks.
Right.
We had to manage it.
Manage it. Because you had a home and you had all those kinds of commitments and everything. Yeah, you bet.
One of the first things we did is we spent this is in 2002. we spent the summer on Martha's Vineyard, which is a very nice place to be.
Uh-huh.
First day there, like, okay, so what are we going to do? We create a vision for our life? I'm like, I have no idea. This came to me. We were doing a morning meditation. I didn't have a daily practice, but I had a little bit of practice, Hong Sa and a few other
Mhm.
things. But what I knew, what I got in that meditation was whatever we are going to do, spirituality is going to be important. And I said that to her, and that knocked the socks off of her because it was coming from me, not
Mm.
coming from her.
So that was the first time you'd actually committed yourself out loud.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Shocked me as much as anybody.
As a female person talking to a male person, I have to say something like, God, you men are just amazing to me. I mean, she always knows. He is the last to hear, with all due respect, but it really is like that. No, I mean, I had my little chauvinistic moment. Let's move right on. So you finally said out loud to your wife, we have to be spiritual. My gosh, can you imagine the fruit of so much prayer on her part, I'm sure, to get
Yeah,
those words from you?
yeah.
Yeah.
Without trying. And that was really important because I needed to not be painted into a corner, not to
Yeah.
feel that I was painted. I needed complete, wide open options. And she gave that to me.
Yeah. Isn't it lovely? I didn't think when I started this interview. I chose not to interview you together because you're both so interesting. I felt in 30 minutes we would be totally unsatisfied about either of you. But I can see that we're dealing with a set here. So this is really fun. But it's very touching, James. I've always known from the outside that you have a very special relationship with your wife, but it's very dear to hear it.
Mhm.
So moving on. So now we're at Martha's Vineyard. We have finally admitted that God is the point. We have this silver cloud from Nabisco. We have soft cracker landings.
Yes.
So what happens next?
Well, jumping forward a couple of months, we're
Uh-huh.
going to move back here to California.
Hmm.
She had arranged to do expanding light to assist in the next yoga teacher training program. So
Hmm.
she's going to assist Gyandev and Jyoti and Lisa Powers and so on. So she's making final arrangements. We're literally the next day, we're going to hop in the car and make the long drive from the East
Hmm.
Coast to the EL. And at the last minute, Jyoti, in her divine wisdom, says, okay, so you're going to spend this 2 weeks teaching this class. What's James going to do?
Hmm.
I don't know.
Hmm.
Jyoti says, does he want to take the yoga teacher training? I don't know. You want to take the yoga teacher training? I had no idea what to say.
Uh-huh.
Jyoti said in her, again, we didn't really know each other, but
Uh-huh.
she has this connection with certain people, and I'm one of those people. She said, look, you don't need to answer. Think about it. Drive across country. Let us know when you get here. There's plenty of room.
Uh-huh.
Somewhere between Nebraska and Utah,
Uh-huh.
I not only figured out I wanted to take it, but I was worried that I did not have a daily yoga practice. I didn't have a daily meditation practice. I was worried they weren't going to take me in.
I see.
I
Yeah.
suddenly really, really wanted. I had no idea why.
Huh, amazing, isn't it? You know,
But
I have a theory. I'm going to interrupt slightly. I call it the chocolate Easter bunny theory of spiritual development, because a chocolate Easter bunny, the first time you get one when you're a kid and you think you have, I mean, I was Jewish, but still, I got chocolate Easter bunnies every once in a while. You think you've got like 18 pounds of chocolate, and then you realize that it's actually just this thin veneer, that was poured over. So it's like it looks like it's solid all the way through, but when you poke it, it just cracks apart. So that my chocolate Easter bunny theory of spiritual growth is that we continue to look the same, but we're completely transforming on the inside. But the chocolate's only an eighth of an inch thick, and at some point it breaks.
yeah.
And when it breaks, there's an entire new creature under there. It sounds like you cracked the chocolate
Oh,
somewhere between
absolutely.
Nebraska and
Absolutely.
Utah.
And what was great is that when we landed and I started the yoga teacher training program, I had no job, I had no
Uh-huh,
career, I had nothing to distract me,
uh,
nothing.
uh,
And I therefore was able to dive into it completely. So that chocolate veneer was gone.
uh-huh, uh-huh,
And it was either, I know it was after day 7, but I know it was before day 10. So I don't know exactly. We had daily morning meditations. 15-minute meditation was really long for me at that point. But
uh-huh,
there was one particular meditation that I had an experience of Yogananda.
uh,
His presence was there for me. He didn't speak to me, but his presence, I felt it.
mm,
That was the moment.
mm.
From that moment, I've been a disciple from that moment, from that particular meditation. Never left.
Isn't that marvelous? James, no matter how many stories I hear from people, and I've heard hundreds by now, it's so extraordinary, isn't it?
Yeah,
And it's so personal.
yeah.
So after you decided you were a disciple of Master and you had no job and no prospects, but you had a wonderful marriage, what
And a
next?
paycheck.
Yeah, you had a paycheck too, which I mean, I'm sure in the context that was very important. Yeah, yeah,
Well, it was because my security, everything in my entire life, security was defined financially.
by
What's in
financially.
the bank account, what's in the how much is coming in, and part of that breaking the chocolate egg for me was the realization that, okay, I'm making so much more money than I ever dreamed I possibly could, and I feel, if anything, less secure.
Ooh, there's a clue.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
exactly.
So Viveca Davy must have been over the moon about all of this.
Yes, and I don't want to speak for her because this is all part of her story, but
Uh,
we call that this period of time our great adventure,
uh-huh,
which for me was breaking that chocolate Easter bunny and
uh-huh,
revealing all of these jewels. It was fantastic. She had some other challenges, and
uh-huh,
that's all part of her story.
uh-huh.
But it was a fantastic time for me because of what was being revealed.
Right,
I couldn't see all the changes, but I could see enough to know that I was becoming a different person.
right,
That the spiritual was so important. The financial didn't matter. It
right,
was helpful, but didn't matter.
right. But it wasn't a straight line. I mean, this is 2002, and you came to live in this community in what year? Palo Alto Community.
6 years ago, so it was 2014. So
14. So
we landed.
you had another 12-year cycle, or yeah, 12-year cycle you had to play out there. Another Jupiter return.
Yeah,
Okay.
we were up in Sonoma County as part of Ananda Santa Rosa, a group up there. There was a teaching center. They it just so happened we landed. They were looking for yoga teachers who just graduated yoga teacher training.
Yeah. Uh-huh. Yeah.
So I was recruited. Viveca Devi was not feeling to teach.
Uh-huh.
We started our own business. Coach. Called it coaching, but really what it was a blending of things that she had done as a spiritual director, the
Uh-huh.
teachings of Yogananda, as well as my corporate experience of
Uh-huh.
strategic planning, mentoring individuals, and we created our own model for
Uh-huh.
coaching people. And we worked with people. It was very spiritually based, but rarely Ananda Yogananda based.
Right.
And we did that for a number of years, very successful
Uh-huh.
until the recession of the 2009, 2010, and we kind of had to let that go.
Uh-huh.
But all that time, in the meantime, I became a Kriyaban, did some other, meditation teacher training, all these, every year going up with expanding light until we no longer could afford that.
So tell me how being a disciple made that experience, that business experience, different than the business experience you had. Of course, you're doing a completely different kind of work. You're doing it in partnership with your wife.
Yeah.
But how, if you can parse it apart, how did being a disciple make that period? By this time, so 2002, how old were you?
Just turned 40.
So you became a disciple at that age, at the age of 40. Okay. So that's 20 years of adulthood. 25 if you count when you refuse to be confirmed as
Exactly.
your birthday.
Exactly.
But so how did being a disciple make it different?
Well, there's probably a couple of parts to it. One is for me, it was going into the practices in particular in an ever more deep way, really working on the devotion.
Uh,
Chanting in particular was something. Chanting and the postures, the yoga postures, were the two biggest parts for me of literally, figuratively opening my heart, getting
uh-huh,
out of my brain, no longer solving problems.
uh-huh, uh-huh,
And the work we did, which was one-on-one, usually Vivek Devi and I work as a team,
uh-huh,
whether we're meeting with a single individual or oftentimes a couple. Um, but it was one-on-one. So it was about listening. It was not about problem solving.
uh-huh,
That one of our base tenets was the answer for the person who was our client. The answer was within them. Our job was to try and pull it out and reflect it back.
right. That's exactly right. Yeah,
And so that became a practice. All of this was just bringing me deeper and deeper into my spiritual spine, and
right.
that went on for almost 10 years.
Uh-huh.
And really until, because I then we couldn't afford for me to continue doing that coaching, and I had to find a job outside. I went back into a corporation,
Uh-huh.
which is a whole nother long story that we don't have time for today.
Well, we have another interview, so we can finish, but
Exactly.
uh-huh.
But
Uh-huh.
that's really where I took these teachings and these practices into the corporate world.
Uh-huh.
But at that time when we were coaching, it was still, I don't want to say it was about me, but in many ways it was. I was helping others through their spiritual path as well. But it's really developing, what does it mean to be a disciple, to
Right.
discipline myself, to give myself to a guru that was really, really foreign to me intellectually,
Right.
but in my heart was absolutely the right thing.
Well, what did you how did you get through that? I mean, how did you balance that between the intellect and the heart? Being as you are a very strong-minded person, how did you get them to cooperate, your heart and mind?
Somewhere in there, we had an astrological reading with Drupada. And one of the things he pointed out in my particular chart is that and I don't know all the planets and all, but
Right.
whatever it is that represents the mind and the intellect was on equal footing as whatever it is that represents the heart.
Really.
And I had spent my entire life at that point focusing on the intellect.
Right.
So to now focus on the heart and that spiritual side, it felt very natural. It felt like absolutely the thing to do, so much so that I didn't even have to think about it. I just was there.
That was a joke. Did you hear that? I didn't even have to think about how to
Yeah,
just
no, I
think.
know. Unintended.
Um, but nonetheless, so you mentioned yoga postures and chanting. Were those what deliberate practices did you use to orient yourself toward leading with your heart?
Well, as Yogananda and Swami have talked about, chanting is just bypasses the mind,
Mhm,
and I had a natural affinity for it. I
mhm,
had, as a youth, I had played a couple of instruments. I didn't sing per se, but piano was one of them. So I was able to pick up harmonium fairly readily and easily. I was teaching yoga a couple of times a week in the yoga center of
mhm,
Santa Rosa, um, and we spent a lot of time sort of teaching, as it were, the philosophies of yoga.
mhm.
Sometimes literally, in the case of teaching Raja Yoga at the center, sometimes sort of in a sideways way with our clients and our model. And all of that was, I think, developing the heart by not developing the mind,
Huh,
specific, not
uh-huh,
problem solving.
uh-huh,
Don't try to solve anything, just be.
yeah.
And that was as natural as that sounds, that was a foreign concept in my practice, in my
Right,
life. I didn't have that before.
right. Wonderful. And of course, serving others it just loosens the hold of the ego. I mean, that's the best way to overcome the ego is just to serve others. Well,
Yeah,
very
that part wasn't foreign to me. I had done
right,
that before, mentoring individuals and so on. So that
right.
that felt natural.
But the integration of your livelihood with seva,
Yeah.
it becomes more efficient.
Yeah.
It becomes more efficient. I mean, I can understand though, even a job of problem solving is a seva job. This needs to get, yeah, that's why you're doing it. You're not just trying to make more money in your own bank account. You're trying to make a whole world work, right, for other
Absolutely.
people.
Absolutely.
Exactly. Well, James, yes, we are not finished. But thank you very much. That was extremely interesting and very helpful. But and what the plan for this week, just so people know, tomorrow we'll talk to Viveca Devi. Wednesday we'll talk to you again. Thursday we'll talk to Viveca Devi, and then we'll go further into the story. Okay. Thank you so much for sharing. Very
Thank
happy
you.
to talk with you. God bless you.
Bye bye.